Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga, and today I present to you a rather late review of chapter 147 of Jujutsu Kaisen. Then again, there's no new chapter this week, so you have nothing better to do than to watch this video anyway. So fun fact, I'm actually writing this review after having completed the blind review series, which is a bit awkward due to the timing of editing and such, but for my overall sense of completion, I need to cover this. Because as a person who has been 100% on Team Panda from the very moment he was introduced, this was heartbreaking. Heartbreaking, but also sickeningly funny, because in my review of the current arc, I said something along the lines of hoping that Principal Yaga gets expanded upon, because we really know nothing about him, and well, I suppose this is a case of be careful what you wish for. And while we're here, you should wish for more Jujutsu Kaisen content, then kindly form a binding vow by hitting the subscribe button for the New World Review. Doing so will practically force me to produce more videos covering this wonderful series for your consumpting pleasure. But getting into it, chapter 147 is all about Masamichi Yaga, a character that to me has always been rather unfortunately on the sidelines despite his position of prominence in the series. And I have to say I got a sinking feeling about this chapter the moment I saw the cover page. It's very simple, it's Panda holding what I assumed was Yaga's hand and just I'm very wary of such sweet imagery in Jujutsu Kaisen because it's generally used as an appetizer for tragedy. Something to make sure you really get hit in the gut by what's about to happen. A more extreme example of this would be the whole Junpei mother situation. She was a character designed to be as likable as possible in order to have the pain of her death hit that much harder. That's how I see this cover page. A very likable, cute, and sweet image designed to completely and utterly destroy us from the inside. And that's what it did. But before we get into that, this chapter was really great in terms of expanding the field of cursed corpses. Like, we've had this discussion before when Mekamaru fought against Panda, but there is indeed something very special about Mr. Panda as well as the rest of Yaga's creations. There's a pretty in-depth explanation around the end of the chapter stating that creating an independent corpse involves replicating soul information and needing to house 3 of these soul drives in one vessel, which eventually evolves into a self-sustaining cursed energy machine. And this immediately contributes a ton to a conversation that Jujutsu Kaisen has been having since, I think, the dawn of the series, which is, what is a soul? How do we quantify it, and how is it tied to the body? Is it tied to the body? Mahito's answer is that the soul was paramount and controls the shape of the body. Meanwhile, the phenomena of Toji went on to suggest that the body and soul can't really be separate, and even the suggestion of a body could go on to generate its own soul. And now here we are with Yaga, who claims to be able to replicate soul-based entities on purely physical information without impacting the shape of the new body. Every time soul information is brought up, we get a very simple explanation attached to it. However, each one of these explanations of what souls are and how to manipulate them tend to contradict the previous idea, which is great because it is a complicated issue, and in the end, who even knows if a soul even exists? I don't. You don't. Unless you do. If you do, let me know in the comments. I'm very curious. But I tell you what, this whole chapter gives new meaning to the term cursed corpse. I've always been intrigued by that title because I don't think we've ever seen an actual corpse used for this technique. However, in Yaga's case specifically, the corpse does not refer to the remnants of the body, but rather the remnants of the soul, which was gathered from the body, and just, yeah, I find it really interesting. Especially when you think about the example that was given in chapter 147. Takaru, the cute, cartoony corpse with a tie. Firstly, there's an interesting question of how ethical it is to seemingly, quite literally, create a copy of someone else's soul. And that's a question we're sort of beginning to tackle in the real world right now with celebrity deepfakes and using the likeness of dead people to perform in films and advertising. It's a really weird and uncomfortable question, but here it's taken to a whole new level. Because as heartwarming as this sort of is, part of me does feel really uncomfortable with copying the soul of that woman's dead son. Like, in theory, there is no harm in it for this particular situation, because it was used to give the woman a reason to live. There's just something that doesn't feel quite right, which is pretty perfectly Jujutsu Kaisen. I don't think it's supposed to feel right, because even our good guys in this series are ultimately dealing with very morally questionable powers across the board. And this is just the latest iteration. It's bigger than that though, because this also speaks to literally being able to create life. Because this isn't Takaru, it's like an amalgamation of 3 people housed within a single vessel. So in effect, this becomes an entirely new existence, just molded from the characteristics of the other 3. But I think the true tragedy really sets in when you realize that Panda, or at least part of Panda, was in fact Yaga's son. It's not explicitly stated, but the implication I get is that just like this woman, Yaga's son died under tragic circumstances, so his soul was replicated and is now contributing to the existence that is the glorious Panda. So that's quite tragically touching here, because obviously Yaga could heavily identify with the woman's situation, and even though he technically understands the existence of both Panda and Takaru, he still can cannot help but see Panda as his son. That took a while to really sink in with me, but I think about that panel now where Yaga claims that he's going to see his son, and it's tough to read, just like a lot of this chapter, especially in retrospect. And I'm very much not looking forward to seeing this animated, however many years that may take from now, because with voice acting and music, this could be a properly tear-generating and soul-destroying moment, rather ironically. And definitely the ending with Panda as well. This stupid panel, even pandas cry. I hate this panel because it does exactly what I said, by punching you in the gut after setting up this really sweet bond. And I want to emphasize for the people who take things very literally, I don't actually hate this panel. It's very beautiful and emotional, but I hate looking at it because it generates many feels. While we're on Panda, we had a very intriguing exchange with Gakuganji, someone who I now despise with all of my being, despite how damn cool he looks with that guitar. But Panda really laid some foundations here with the whole human behaviors don't bind Panda speech and his ability to look past reactionary human inclinations. In a weird way, Panda represents a level of evolution, the sort of stuff that Jogo was spouting about, an entirely new breed of true humans. Panda is human at his core, or cause plural, but he exists on an entirely different plane of concerns. And what can I say? Panda is the best of us, and good on Akutami for taking the super weird concept of a panda sorcerer and turning it into a deeply emotional journey. But also, screw Akutami for doing that. Having brought up old mate Gakuganji earlier, something else not to be understated in this chapter were Yaga's last words. All he had to do in order to live was reveal the formula for crafting these insane tie-wielding existences, and in the end he did the exact opposite by revealing it only when death was certain, claiming that this was a curse imparted onto Gakuganji. And I guess that's a curse of knowledge rather than anything to do with energy or technique. So Gakuganji is now the sole individual who understands this process, and he is left with quite a burden of whether or not to share this information with the higher-ups, thus potentially leading to creating an army of soul-based corpses, which sounds horrifying because at that point we are well beyond the ethical line of copying souls and more into the arena of enslaving copied souls. And it's now very much the responsibility of our other principal to decide what to do with that. Also, just a note, nice touch that it ultimately came down to a showdown between the principals, Kyoto and Tokyo. Sad that Kyoto prevailed, but what can you do? And you know what? All of a sudden, Jujutsu High is a pretty rubbish place to be. There's no Gojo, no Yaga, just evil old administrators sitting behind. What even are they sitting behind? Just like the panels, I think? But come to think of it, they've really sort of succeeded, haven't they? They think Yuji is dead due to the binding vow from Yuta, Yaga is now actually dead, and Gojo remains sealed in the prison realm. From their perspective, everything is going ridiculously well. Like I've said before, Shibuya was an absolute gift to them, and that's important because before now, I don't think we've been given too strong a reason to dislike these mysterious administrators. Since the beginning, Gojo has expressed his own hatred of the system, but we are only really just now getting to see the system in action. And it's pretty horrific. You can definitely see how all of these curses have manifested in the world because there are people out there who are indistinguishable from, being a curse. They are a curse on humanity, not literally, but sort of, but forever making things far worse for their own desires. And in the end, actual weird-looking, scary curses are just symptoms of this problem. We are going to need to tackle the actual problem sooner or later, because it's always better to cure a disease rather than to constantly be in a state of attempting to treat it. What I will say is that it does give our protagonists this wonderful rogue feeling now because they really have no allies. On one side, they are faced with a legion of curses striving to kill them, and on the other, we have a system of humans who are also gunning for most of them. So we really are in the lowest moment of the story so far for our main characters, Yuji in particular. But also not to be ignored, Kusakabe was featured in this chapter, and in fact it was his sister who was the woman who could not live without her corpse son. I always like learning more about Kusakabe though, and even though he's very pro Yuji execution, he is a pretty cool guy. Although to be honest, sometimes it's also quite easy to see how one can be in favor of killing Yuji. Like yes, it's a very tough decision, but the risk of Sukuna is a threat to all humanity. So this whole Yuji thing is a gigantic gamble, which because it's shonen is probably going to pay off, but some people just aren't inclined to risk as much as say Gojo and Fushiguro. Now in terms of art, there's a couple of highlights during this chapter. Firstly, I love how all of Yaga's cursed corpses are drawn. They're very sketchy and kind of quite bland. I mean, bland is probably the wrong word, but all the words I can think of sound kind of negative at first. Like instead of bland, you could also call them flat, unrefined, simplistic, but that's exactly their charm. Like this Takaru thing doesn't look like he belongs in Jujutsu Kaisen, and neither do any of of the other corpses. They're all these beautifully simplistic childlike figures ripped straight out of a cartoon. And by the way, F this panel. The one where they're all saying, "Oh, we'll miss you," because in retrospect, this is probably even a bigger gut punch than the panda's crying thing. Reading this, knowing that this is the last time they'll ever see him, is like saying goodbye to a pet or a loved one, and I hate it. Stop toying with my emotions like this, Akutami. Have you not done enough already? Have you not? Are you not entertained by my pain? But the point was, which I started to make, is that I like their deliberate simplicity. It emphasizes their innocence and purity and all of that. And the other noteworthy point of art was our final panel where Akutami elected to depict Panda wailing with this image of moth surrounding a street lamp, and then having a close-up of assumedly one dead moth as our final panel. So as much as I love light being depicted in manga, I didn't get this at first, but having looked into it, the symbolism is very clear in Japanese because Yaga can apparently be translated as moth. So during this chapter, we see Masamichi Yaga get killed, and then to really hammer that idea home, we see a creature of his namesake also dead. Yes, it's just a really depressing visual metaphor. And in fact, this chapter was really depressing in general, wasn't it? I came into it being all excited to learn more about the Cullen game, maybe meet another new contestant, and instead I am hit over the head with pain and emotion, and then another round of pain. Pain which only becomes worse when you read the chapter for a second time. Oh, it is so much worse. But look, while it was a very sudden end to Mr. Yaga, a character that I really wanted to expand on a lot more, it did work undeniably well. It's not because of Yaga himself though. I maintain that he was still quite underutilized and underexplored, but what's important here are his cursed corpses. Those are the feelings that we empathize with. From the simple notion of Takaru and the rest missing Yaga to the extreme of Panda tears. I feel bad for the cursed corpses more so than I do for Yaga, but it doesn't really matter so long as the tragedy does its job. And it does just that. Good job, Akutami. You've ruined me once again. But that pretty much does it for chapter 147 of Jujutsu Kaisen, and screw this chapter, but what do you guys think? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below or even join my Discord server. And if you're keen for some more Jujutsu sorcery, then please do check out some of my other videos or even subscribe to the channel for very maybe regular Jujutsu Kaisen morbidity delivered straight into your YouTube feed. But for now, this has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.